A CNN original story for you now. We have been profiling a former teen inmate who claims she was abused while behind bars, and apparently her case is not isolated. CNN.com's Ashley Fantz has the story.
Girls as young as 13 say they were shackled for weeks at a time at a detention center in Mississippi. The reason, they say, to keep them from escaping.
I went to school in shackles, used the bathroom in shackles, ate in shackles, and had to participate in recreation in shackles.
Erica was 16 when she went to Columbia Training School. A runaway picked up for a probation violation. Erica and 9 other girls are suing the state, saying they were physically and sexually abused there. In an affidavit filed with the suit, a 15-year-old girl housed at Columbia writes,
"He came inside my cell. He started touching me and he tried to kiss me, grabbing me around my waist. He tried to stick his hands in my pants and I started crying."
I think they should be ashamed of themselves.
Erica's mother wants answers.
You don't treat people like that. You don't treat children like that.
Mississippi is among 11 states the U.S. Justice Department has sued for civil rights violations at youth lockups. Although it's often been a case of he said, she said between officials and inmates, some surveillance video has captured scenes like this. From Florida, a 14-year-old Martin Anderson being beaten and restrained by guards who were later acquitted of manslaughter after Anderson died. This 2004 video shows staffers chasing and pummeling a teen inmate at a Stockton, California lockup. Recently, another investigation was launched into alleged violence between a guard and an inmate at the same facility. This spring, 2 former administrators at a Texas youth facility are expected to stand trial on charges they were having sex with teen inmates, one case among many in Texas where 90 state employees over the past 8 years have been disciplined or fired for sexual misconduct with jailed adolescents. To address the problem, Texas has added hundreds more surveillance cameras and personnel. In Mississippi, the latest allegations of abuse at Columbia Training School come less than 5 years after a Justice Department probe that found girls had been hogtied, forced to eat vomit, and confined for days in a windowless isolation room.
In Mississippi, the governor has ordered shut down Columbia Training School and all of its teenage female inmates transferred to a nearby detention facility. But the Department of Justice is suing that place also, saying it has its own set of serious problems.
Girls will be sent to Oakley Training School, which the Justice Department said still needs an enormous amount of work. Governor Haley Barbour and state officials who oversee the facilities declined to be interviewed for this story.
I'm very glad Columbia's closing. Very glad. It's sort of kind of like a relief because they put me and like 6 other girls through this, and from their past lawsuits in 2004 all the way to now, how many girls have they made physically, emotionally abused?
They owe my daughter and all these other girls, they owe them an apology.
CNN.com's Ashley Fantz joins us right now. Pleased to have you, Ashley. That was a fascinating report. You have to tell us, first of all, how widespread is this? Is this essentially the norm in these institutions?
I don't know if I would call it the norm, but if you look at the Department of Justice that is now currently suing 11 states where there are facilities like the one in Columbia, which was featured in the package, for a wide range of physical and sexual abuse of teenagers who are incarcerated there. And it's not just abuse, it's a lack of medical care, it's a lack of mental health professionals who are in these places. I think also what you have is a combination of undertrained, underpaid staff. Sometimes guards are making barely $19,000 a year, and there's also a culture of wanting to punish kids alone and not rehabilitate them and give them the therapy they need.
It sounds like they're just not respected as fellow human beings.
They're not, and oftentimes these girls are runaways. They're from bad homes, they've been abused in the home, and they have a host of mental health problems going into a facility, and you pair that with the fact that they're already obstinate. I mean, teenagers are generally obstinate,
right, exactly.
But when you add this in with it, if you don't have the properly trained people to attack the problem, then it becomes really a battle between guards and inmates that often escalates into really severe violence.
And you mentioned this has been going on since the 90s. That is a staggeringly long amount amount of time. Why was this able to continue for so long?
Well, I mean, we've just gotten used to, I think, warehousing kids. We've gotten used to just throwing them away and just throwing them in a cell and, you know, doing the basic things like, you know, clothing and feeding them, but not really listening to what kind of problems they have, or, you know, having enough mental health professionals who are willing to work in these kinds of settings. I mean, if you have a therapist who would rather be, you know, treating individual people who don't have these problems, why would they go work in a correctional facility? You know, it takes a really special person to do that. And states also just aren't willing to spend the money. I mean, to overhaul a system, it takes an enormous amount of time and a lot of money. And so states will often choose to slap a Band-Aid on it rather than to dismantle their systems altogether.
So many states obviously approaching this incorrectly. Are there states that are an example of how this can be done well?
Yeah, there definitely are. They're the exception to the rule, but Missouri and Massachusetts are known for actually completely dismantling their systems, and they've done really core things like geographically taken down the size of a building that you know that inmates are housed in, so it feels more like a residential kind of setup, so you don't feel like you're just behind bars and no one's paying attention to you. It's more like living in a house or living in a dorm. They've also just hired the mental health professionals that are necessary to deal with this particular population of children.